I started working on an animation piece that's also in the show called A Short History, starring Azmi as herself, and I'd come across this word Azmi, and it sort of struck me as being really kind of poignant, this idea of, I kind of got into the wordplay of it, I guess, just as me, something that is like me or as me, but not really me. I kind of came across this pond near where I live, where these geese, these Canada geese, had taken over. I loved their unity and their ambiguity in that they look all the same. I guess all sort of species of animals have that similarity, but they're also one of the few species of birds that you can't tell male from female based on their plumage. They just sort of this uniform base. They're very vigilant. They have these beautiful long necks that they can sort of peer always on the horizon and have kind of an eye out for what's going on. So I did this body of work coming out of those brown drawings where the gestures or positions that Azmi would take started to mimic these gestures that the geese would do. So as a way of kind of blurring Azmi's identity, you know, in terms of gender or you know, male, female, but also in terms of blurring her kind of her identity as a living thing, that it could blur between a human form and an animal form. And so I sort of decided that if Azmi's on this kind of quest that's unfolding, that this goose would be her kind of traveling companion. So there was this sort of series of drawings and collages where Azmi and the goose were always together. And Azmi is never really a unique thing. She's sort of a multipliable self. She can exist in the same landscape many, many times. She can also kind of communicate across landscapes between herself, across time, across space, between herself, and as a way of kind of referencing this idea of history and time and how we can kind of re-meet ourselves, or I imagine this idea of re-meeting yourself at different points in time in history and different landscapes. And then so blurring these many Azmi selves and then introducing this goose. So there was this kind of like fluidity between all of these Azmis and all of these geese. I started to introduce this beading into some of these goose parts. I was born in Botswana in southern Africa, and there's somewhat of a tradition of beads having an importance culturally there. And I loved sort of imagining these worlds. And after I had laid out a few of them just loosely, I realized that I was kind of recreating from memory landscapes that I had experienced myself. Almost, I guess, retroactively, the inspiration for a lot of the titles for these come from a series of poems by an American poet named Mary Oliver. The brown drawings all come from, the titles for the brown drawings all come from a poem called Wild Geese. And it's, what I love about Mary Oliver's poetry is I feel like she sort of understands this idea of a hybridity of self, that her work is all very based in the natural world and animals, and kind of making these metaphorical relationships between animal experiences and human experiences. And there's always this idea of travel and migration recurring as a sort of a representation of cycles. But then some of the titles come from E. E. Cummings poems. A lot of them come from Bjork, titles of songs by the artist Bjork, which this one does actually is called I'll Wade Out. And it's a song that sort of deals with this idea of wading into this golden pool, where you're kind of wading into the history of yourself, that you would find in this oily golden pool all of these many selves. This piece is from an E. E. Cummings poem called Death Having Lost, and it's from that poem that the title for the whole show, See You Again, comes from. But so this specific piece is called Having Lost. With this specific body of work, Azmi and the goose have come to the kind of a very important moment in a classic kind of archetypal hero's quest, the moment when the hero has to sort of face her fears or undergo the kind of the ultimate sacrifice. And so with this body of collages, there's all of these sort of visual references to caves and to the abysses, darkness, and these underground worlds where you know, Azmi has to kind of survive. And also what's kind of significant about this group of work is that whereas Azmi and the goose were very comfortable to be together in this sort of la-la land in a way, with this group of work, I think Azmi and the goose are realizing that they're too comfortable. And so I think for Azmi, the ultimate sacrifice is letting go of that goose. There's really literally this fall now that Azmi and the goose, and in this sort of gesture of Azmi kind of almost pulling out that goose figure from her hair as she's falling. With this show, I imagine this group, this installation, this wall drawing, site-specific wall drawing, to be kind of a bridge between the collage world, the tiny little collage world, and then the sort of starkness of the drawings on white paper. Again, you can see the two Azmis together, the goose in trouble, and whereas in all of the previous works, this sort of goose embodiment in on Azmi's head, whereas before they were alert and awake and really aware, now there's this sort of suggestion that they're no longer there, that they no longer have that kind of life in them anymore. In this piece, there's kind of this reference to like kind of letting something go over the edge of this sort of cliff, or searching for something that's no longer there. In almost all of these newer ones, there's no more goose. And there's this kind of void, this sort of blackness